The truth occurs. The truth occurs.
Hi everyone. I'm here today again with Professor Anthony Hall from the University of Lethbridge, and you're a professor of
Globalization Studies.
And so we're going to talk about some global issues. We're going to talk about actually Fukushima, which is a concern that's on a lot of people's minds lately. So it happened last year. There was a lot of talk that we're all going to die. We're all going to get irradiated. It's worse than Chernobyl, and it's pretty bad. But so far, we're still here a year later. But the danger's not past, and recently people have been talking about it a lot more. A certain senator said that all it would take would be for there to be another earthquake, and this cracked foundation could give way, and that basically it's just a disaster waiting to happen that could wipe out humanity. So, Tony, you wrote a paper about Fukushima when this first happened.
Well, it mesmerized me as I realized that there were 40 years of nuclear waste sitting on the site. In Ontario, I lobbied in the 1980s against nuclear energy. Ontario is one of the most nuclearized jurisdictions in the world. And the real Achilles heel of the industry, the nuclear energy industry, is the nuclear waste, which can remain toxically radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, half-life of millions of years in some cases, some of these radionuclides. So how do you keep a substance isolated from all of ecology, from air, water, no contact with any life form for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years? This is a big problem. So what it turns out has happened is they just kept this nuclear waste on the site. So since they started, Fukushima, it was the first nuclear plant in Japan, started in 1967. They've been storing 40 years of nuclear waste on that site. And once I found out about that, I thought, oh my God, that it's like just waiting to be spread to this huge quantity of radioactive material, and of course there's a juxtaposition of various types of industrial procedures, the most dangerous, toxic industrial procedures known to humankind, and they're pushed together in a very small area. So if you have a problem with one part of it, it's going to spread. Now, I found myself asking, well, why would they put the nuclear fuel rods, the spent nuclear fuel rods, which are highly radioactive, why would they put them right on top of the reactors? That doesn't make any sense. And then when I studied it, I realized those designs, the General Electric Mark I reactor, that goes back to the Nautilus submarine. The first, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the idea was, well, let's see if we can use nuclear energy for other means. So the first thing they decided was to apply it to submarines. Submarines in the World War II showed themselves to be really valuable, really good weapons, important weapons, but you can't run a diesel engine underwater. You can have a battery. And the submarines in World War II could only go maybe 20 miles underwater. So the idea was, let's use nuclear energy to power nuclear submarines. So the very prototype designed in the early 1950s for the Nautilus submarine was blown up and applied at Fukushima. It's like an antique nuclear reactor, and the spent nuclear fuel rods in the pool above the reactors. Well, if you're building a power plant for a submarine, it makes sense. It's a small area, but it doesn't make sense to put it on land.
So what they basically did was they built a nuclear submarine on land.
They had the design. I guess they spent the money to make the design. It would be expensive to make another design, so they just used the design, saved money.
Very dangerous.
And then you put in new plutonium fuel rods, like French high-tech. Plutonium is really, really radioactive. Of course, nuclear nuclear plants, they produce the materials for nuclear weapons. You need this plutonium to make a nuclear weapon. So you need to understand that the nuclear energy industry is the same industry as the nuclear weapon industry. And in the 1950s, of course, people were starting to freak out as they were testing these nuclear weapons, and they were getting bigger and bigger, and the Soviet Union is in competition. You know, there's this superpower rivalry, and that rivalry, it's a real bummer, eh? People should get together.
Well, it's terrible. I mean, they're taking chances. I mean, why would you want to... So, but it basically comes down to is that they built it this way because it was cheap, and then once they had built it, they just left it that way because they didn't want to spend any money?
Well, they didn't just leave it. They built 58 more plants on an earthquake zone. And they built these plants on the coast. So it's a given that if you have an earthquake in Japan, you're going to have a tsunami afterwards. And so in a way you could say it was an accident, but it wasn't really an accident because you could predict that was going to happen sooner or later.
How could they be so negligent?
Well, and you talk about negligence. So this reactor number 4, so you saw the buildings explode. These there was explosions in these nuclear reactors, and now these pools are just exposed to the atmosphere, and you know, it's flowing into, it's polluting the whole Pacific Ocean, all the sea life. You know, the Pacific Ocean is one of the great food sources of humanity. The West Coast, you know, we get high levels of radioactivity, but there you have this pool of spent fuel rods exposed to the atmosphere on reactor number 4, and if there is an earthquake and it falls over, this structure is keeling over. This is where the senator in the United States says, well, this is going to be the most horrific event in human history. It's going to contaminate the environment on a scale we've never seen before. So...
I have a couple questions then.
Yeah.
Okay. One, how likely is that to actually happen? I mean, we hear a lot of, oh, this is going to happen or that could happen. Yeah, it could. Does that mean it's going to happen? Well, you know, what's the chance of it happening? And B, why hasn't anybody fixed this plant? I mean, it's been over a year.
Well, I can guarantee you that for years and years to come, it's going to get worse and worse because there's so much juxtaposition of different industrial procedures, very dangerous industrial procedures, one put beside the other, all the you know, thousands and thousands of nuclear spent fuel rods, all on this one site. So if you have a breakdown in one system, it's going to spread to another system, system. You can't get at it.
Can't they fix it? I mean, who's responsible for this thing?
Well, that is, of course, the huge issue of nuclear energy. Who is responsible? Nobody will sell insurance. These are private companies. Nobody will sell them insurance because it's too dangerous. So the public are sort of subsidizing these welfare bums with...
like it's coming from people's tax money?
Well, imagine, what would be what is the liability of an accident like Fukushima, if we call it an accident? How many millions of cancers will happen as a result? How many deformities will happen?
Yeah.
Who's responsible when these kind of...
It could wipe out human life. I mean, the thing, it could wipe out...
It's not only human life.
It could wipe out the entire planet.
All life on Earth is subject to this radioactivity. So the travesty of this is the little company, the Tokyo Energy and Power Company, TEPCO, that created the conditions, these tremendously dangerous conditions in the first place. They're still in control of the supposed cleanup, and so they're not to be trusted.
How come they haven't cleaned it up?
Well, how do you clean it up? I mean, you don't just turn off a nuclear plant like you turn off the light.
Like, if there's a crack in the floor and it's made out of concrete, why don't you just fix the crack?
Well, are you going to go in? Are you going to put on your suit and go in and do it?
I'm not a radiation expert.
And what I understand is this TEPCO, they've been hiring street people. They don't even, you know, you would want your top technologists in the world, but who's going to go in and put on their suit and go into Fukushima plant and
somebody who needs the money, I guess.
Somebody who needs the money. So in Chernobyl, the Soviet Union had 800,000 Soviet soldiers to go in. They put on their suit. They go in for 10 minutes. You go in for 10 minutes, you've had your lifetime exposure in 10 minutes. In Japan, we don't see anything like that.
Nobody wants to clean it up.
If anybody goes in there, I guess they're liable if another agency goes in. Not so General Electric, who designed and created these reactors, they're liable, you would think.
Is that the problem, that they don't want to have deal with the liability? If they go in and they try to fix it and they make it worse, then they're going to be liable? So is this about money?
That's a huge part of it, and of course it speaks to the travesty of this whole industry, that there is no real situation with insurance. Like, these are private companies. You think, okay, you're running an industrial procedure, you go and get an insurance policy. Nobody will insure this. It's too dangerous.
Okay, so, but in the end, like, this is threatening the future of the planet, and everybody's like, well, I don't want to get involved because I don't want to get sued.
Yeah, you don't want to get involved.
Well, nobody seems to want to get involved. They're all worried that they're going to get sued.
Yeah.
But that's crazy. I mean, would you rather get sued or be dead or responsible for every... But Tony, I got to say though that it recently, I just read this yesterday, it came out that the Mayan calendar doesn't actually end in 2012.
Yeah.
So we're not going to die.
Yeah, this 2012 stuff is starting to look kind of true, eh?
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people worry that we're going to die. I mean, there's all like apocalyptic end time signs and things. And as for the Mayan calendar, it says that it actually goes on after 2012. So you can't say, well, Mayan calendar says we're going to die December 21st, the world will end, and that's going to be Fukushima. You can't come to that conclusion because the Mayan calendar, it turns out it doesn't really end after all. Plus, they're already planning for like the next Olympics. So, I mean, why would they do that if we were all going to die?
Well, you know, it's not a type of death that we're familiar with. You know, you get hit, you get sick immediately, you die. No, it can take years, it can take decades. It creates a slow, steady
so we're not going to blow
proliferation
up in like a giant
of cancers. And of course, the terrible thing about this radioactivity is once it gets in the gene pool, it's permanent. It passes from generation to generation. So, you know, Einstein said, you know, when we discovered this source of energy, atomic energy, nuclear energy, it changed everything except our way of thinking. There was all kinds of the scientists who in the Manhattan Project, when they were building, you know, the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, people said, well, they justified it by saying, well, when this energy becomes available to humanity, humanity will have to shut this down. We'll have to find a way to transcend war and, you know, violence among humankind as a way of settling differences and resolving problems. So, you know, we haven't dealt with this, and it's proliferating, and there's all kinds of, you know, new weapon systems that are using nuclear energy. People have been looking at what's going on in Iraq and saying, well, they're shooting depleted uranium, but then some say, no, it's way beyond depleted uranium. They're using enriched uranium in new sorts of weapons. Of course, there's lots of speculation what really happened on 9/11. How did those buildings come down from the top? I mean, we're seeing some kind of new technology. Was that some... So this nuclear... Think about the United States' relationship with the rest of the world. I mean, with all of, you know, thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons in space, you know, space technology and submarines, missile silos all through the Midwest. This is still alive. I mean, this is to intimidate people. This is, you know, how do you use this kind of unimaginable destructive force as a means of geopolitics? The corruption of it, the violence of it, the psychological violence of it, the terror of it.
They're just trying to scare, like, throw their weight around with it. I figure they're never really going to use it because then we'll all die, including them.
But, yeah, you know, you say never use it. Well, I mean, Fukushima is like a nuclear war.
Yeah.
It's just a slow...
they probably did it on
slow
purpose.
moving. Well...
Could be, you know.
We don't rule anything out at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe that's what they're just doing for depopulation. But and there's still the same. So this thing is sitting there. It's got a crack in it. Nobody wants to take responsibility. Everybody's afraid of liability. Hasn't been fixed yet. So what are we supposed to do? I mean, what's the chance that it's going to actually blow?
And you know what we should be seeing is a Steven Spielberg movie. You know, like. A major assembly and convergence of the most great technologists, you think the United States has been studying how you live in radioactive environments, how you live and govern the world after a nuclear holocaust. I mean, there must be all kinds. They must have monitors to be tracing the radioactivity under the water or in the atmosphere. I mean, they must have all kinds of information that they're not making available to us. We should be seeing the most significant convergence of industrial know-how and to save humanity, indeed all life on Earth, from this terrible outcome. But we're not seeing that. Why aren't we seeing that? What's going on? And beyond that, it's being covered up. We're not getting, the information that people need to protect themselves is not being disseminated through the mainstream media. So it's such an illustration of the dire straits we're in, and the complete irresponsibility and madness of those in control, that they feel no responsibility apparently for the future of humanity.
They're crazy. They're totally out of their minds. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Is there anything that you think that we could do? Like, what, call on the UN?
Well, what is the UN? The UN is nation states, but the people of humanity, we need to almost transcend and go beyond our governments, but yeah, whoever is going to create an alternative way of governing, I mean, one of the first things we have to do is deal with Fukushima.
Yeah.
I really think in a way our first priority should be the people of Japan, the people who are on Honshu Island. It's a small little place. It's like Great Britain. I mean, coming from Canada, where we have vast spaces. So you have 120 million people on that tiny little island. Tokyo, which has 30 million people, is like 100 miles away, 150 miles away. So they're, in a sense, it's being replicated as after Hiroshima. They were kind of like guinea pigs. They were human experiment taking place there, and again, that's what we're seeing. So I really think, in a way, our first priority should be, let's help the people in Japan protect themselves, and if necessary, evacuate.
I think,
Tokyo
I heard that
evacuated?
I heard this, okay, I can't confirm it now, I don't remember where I read it, but that they were evacuating people to Russia. That's what I read.
I started to think, where would they go? Maybe by Hudson's Bay, there's water up there, there's lots of space up there.
I read that they were starting to evacuate people from Japan.
And, they were saying worse than 3 Mile Island, not as bad as Chernobyl. All that was propaganda.
I hear worse than Chernobyl.
Way worse than Chernobyl, because of the radioactive waste on the site. 40 years of collected radioactive waste. And the thing is, this is all over the world. This isn't only in Japan. First and foremost, you have, of course, California, which has 2 plants, just the same ancient, antique nuclear plants with those old reactors right on the ocean. So when the earthquake comes and then the tsunami comes, it's the same thing. They're gung ho to build nuclear plants in India. People are mobilizing in India to say, no more Fukushimas. And if we can't, as humanity, mobilize around this, if this isn't a wake-up call, and I remind you that this is the same industry as the nuclear weapons industry. It's the same companies. General Electric built, Fat Man and Little Boy. Like, what a colloquial names for these bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So General Electric, General Electric should be front and center in this, in terms of, you're going to be held liable.
Maybe if people get really outraged and they all drop their GE stock because of it, that'll push them, because that's the only thing that means anything to them, is money.
Barack Obama, Jeffrey Immelt, great buddies. Jeffrey Immelt is CEO of General Electric, but Obama is a lobbyist for the nuclear energy industry. To what extent was this climate change sort of financed by the nuclear energy industry to make nuclear energy power plants look green?
Yeah, green.
Yeah. things are stacked against us, but we'll do the best we can under the circumstances.
Yeah, we got to keep raising awareness about it so people understand that what this has to do with a lot of corporate greed and corruption and government corruption as well. So thanks, Tony, and thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.